I'm going to tell you a little bit about me first. So my story begins with my mother. My mother was diagnosed with inflammatory breast cancer at age 37. That's not only an incredibly young age to get breast cancer at all, but inflammatory breast cancer is one of the worst types of breast cancer to get. It literally goes from 0 to stage 4 in a matter of weeks with almost no symptoms at all. She was given a 10% chance of living, and thank God she had amazing doctors and she had a great prognosis. Through chemo and surgery, she beat it, and she is still alive today. And so growing up, I knew sort of in the back of my mind that I had some kind of risk for breast cancer. And so throughout my 20s, I was going to doctors and getting tested and having just very, very minimal testing done because I was so young. And although my mother having breast cancer at such a young age was actually a pretty big red flag, because I was so young, anytime I thought that something might be off, they'd say, oh, you're super young, it's really not possible for you. And so as I got older, I finished grad school, I got married, I moved back to my home city of New York. I had a doctor that suggested that I got tested for the BRCA gene mutation. And if you don't know what that is, basically we all have copies of BRCA genes, or BRCA genes, either one is fine. And they are responsible for suppressing tumors in breast and ovarian tissue. And if you have mutations in those genes, while it's not super common, it actually can be quite devastating. So in the general population, the incidence of breast cancer for American women is 1 in 8, so roughly 12%. If you have one of these mutations, what happens is if your body creates a tumor in breast and ovarian tissue, it literally can't stop it from growing. And so the quoted statistic for people who are carriers of these mutations, it's up to 87% lifetime risk of breast cancer. And so you guys might be aware Angelina Jolie made it sort of a more known mutation because she's this beautiful and glamorous woman, and she brought it to the limelight. And so also, the other fun part of being a BRCA mutation carrier is that while the general population of women have a 2% lifetime risk of ovarian cancer, BRCA mutation carriers have a 50% lifetime risk. And so usually when you see families that have this mutation, the incidence is about 1 in 300. And so if you think about 300 million people in the United States, then roughly 1 million people in the States have it. And most people actually don't know that they have it. But a lot of times you'll see family trees, and it's literally every woman in that family tree: breast cancer at 35, ovarian cancer at 42, breast cancer at 27. So while it's not incredibly common, it's actually very devastating for the family trees that have it. I have a friend who's a carrier of the mutation. Her sister at age 30 was diagnosed with stage 2 and stage 4 breast cancer in both of her breasts at the same time. So it's something where, because my family, I only have my mom, I thought, this is a fluke. I'm going to get tested for this gene. Everything's going to be great. Everything's going to be fine. I just, started my new life with my husband. I'm just going to make sure that I don't have it, in case one day we decide to have kids. I want to, just be really aware of my risk. And so I went in for genetic counseling where they explain to you what the benefits and what the risks are and what are the downsides of finding out what your risk is. And so I decided to get the test. I went in for my results. I even let a grad student sit in on my session. And I'll never forget, the genetic counselor said to me, I regret to inform you, but you are a carrier of the BRCA1 mutation. I lost it because I was mourning the life that I had before. I was mourning not knowing. I was mourning almost being naive. I was mourning the picture I had of what my life was going to be, and now I had this anvil that was hanging over me. And so BRCA mutation carriers are given a couple of options. So one is surveillance, which is what I was doing, but they kind of up their game a little bit when they find out that you have this mutation. Because with breast cancer, they actually, for the most part, can detect it very, very early now. And so, they've got a 95% survival rate for 5 years after diagnosis. And so that is the option that I chose initially, because the other option seemed like a little bit crazy to me. The second option was chemo prevention, which is they give you a bunch of drugs, And it's not really recommended for women who haven't had kids yet because it puts you into early menopause. And then the third option was surgery. And that seemed insane to me. Like, why would I cut off perfectly healthy parts of my body? You know, and there's a lot of emphasis on how a woman looks in our society, and I wasn't quite ready to part with what I thought was such a huge part of my identity. And so I chose surveillance. So I decided, okay, I've been doing this for 10 years already. How bad could this really be? And surveillance is a series of tests throughout the year that include clinical breast exams, MRIs, sonograms, and mammograms. And the problem is, once you have this mutation, is that they are extra vigilant about screening you. And because of that, there's a lot of false issues. And not necessarily, and they're right to do that because I do have this mutation. And so anytime something was a little off in an MRI, I had to come back and get it biopsied. And so while I was only, in theory, supposed to be going into the hospital for testing, 2-3 times a year, I was really going back kind of every other month. And it was something where I didn't want to live my life like that anymore. I didn't want to sit there and think about, is this the time? Is this the time that I get breast cancer? And my mother, what she went through was horrific. It was something where she didn't know if she was going to live or die. She didn't know if she would live to see her children grow up. And so I decided, making the easiest and hardest decision of my life, I decided to get a preventative double mastectomy. And so in layman's terms, I had my breast tissue removed, taking my risk from 87% to 2%. So I now have a less of a risk of breast cancer than the average woman. My lifetime risk is virtually zero. I go in once a year to the plastic surgeon just to make sure the reconstruction is all good, and that's pretty much it, and I don't think about breast cancer anymore. And just a side note, for BRCA mutation carriers, because for the ovarian side of things, we actually don't have the technology to detect ovarian cancer at an early state, it's actually recommended across the board that BRCA mutation carriers have their ovaries removed by the time they're 40. And so I'm not quite there yet, but that's also on the horizon for me. And so it's pretty interesting in terms of family planning. Do I want, there are a lot of issues that come up. Do I want to pass this on to my children? Is adoption something I'd consider? Would I consider in vitro, where you test the embryo and make sure it doesn't have the mutation? There's a lot of various options that women have, and that's completely wonderful and amazing, but there's also a lot of emotional weight that this information carries. And so I had the surgery, which was, and I say that I had the surgery very lightly because, it's been years now and I don't see it as such a big deal, but it is a really big deal. It's very major surgery. It's something where you have to go through physical therapy because you can't move your arms. You can't lift more than 5 pounds for 6 weeks, but I'm 2-3 years out of it. I've had 3 surgeries. I'm totally done, and I don't think about breast cancer anymore. So after I had the surgery, I started thinking about, well, what now? So at first, I was eating everything under the sun, just treating myself. I was like, I just went through hell. So I am going to eat burritos and sushi and chocolate cake and pizza. And I ended up gaining a little bit of weight, and I wasn't very happy with myself. And so I started thinking about it and just doing tons of research about, well, why do we as Americans have so much disease? And, and not just cancer, in terms of heart disease, in terms of type 2 diabetes. We have, an obesity epidemic. And why does that not exist in other places? What are we doing that's so wrong? We don't have a particular ethnicity. We're a melting pot of all different cultures, of all different ethnicities. So what is it about our lifestyle that's making us so sick? And so started doing research about, what are we eating? What are we doing to our bodies? What does our food supply look like? And what is it about our lifestyle that is making us so sick? And I started this journey in terms of what I was putting in my body and trying to figure out, what foods are anti-cancer, what foods, and aside from the cancer, I also have diabetes and Alzheimer's in my family, so I really hit the genetic jackpot. And so I wanted to figure out, how can I increase my longevity? How can I feel energetic? How can I look and feel my best? And it really just went back to food. What are we eating? Why does something from McDonald's cost less than a head of broccoli? There's something wrong. There's something kind of off. And there's all these really interesting studies about, cancer incidence in the US versus other countries. So in Japan, for example, the incidence of breast cancer is quite low, and it's actually rising now that they've adopted a Western diet. So they did a study on Japanese immigrants to Hawaii, because there's a pretty big Japanese immigrant population in Hawaii. And by the third generation, so the immigrants' grandchildren, that generation had the same incidence of breast cancer than as the average American. So something's up. And so I started eating for my health and my longevity, and then all these other things started happening. I slept better. My skin cleared up. I lost weight that I always thought was kind of part of me. I look at old pictures of myself, especially from college, and I'm like, wow, I was really puffy because I was eating stuff that was inflaming me all the time. And so my interest was piqued in lifestyle and diet and nutrition, and because I've had such great results, and because the people around me who have adopted similar diets have also had such great results. And it's not about, for me, it wasn't about losing weight. It wasn't about fitting into a size 0 or whatever the standard is nowadays. For me, it was about my health, but because there were so many of these other wonderful benefits, I went into this field of nutrition and recipe writing and cooking and figuring out how to get myself to exercise, because God, I hate exercising. And I figured out a way to do it, and it's sort of like going to the dentist, where I'm really happy after, but during I want to shoot myself. And so, it's about finding out what's right for you and finding out what's right for your body, and this concept of dieting and how it's just flawed and it's not right, and the weight loss industry should not be making as much money as they're making, and everyone wants, oh, if I take this pill, will I look like Kim Kardashian? Well, you know what? She has trainers, she has nutritionists, she has private chefs, and if we had her situation, we would all look just as good, if not better than her. And so, it's hilarious to me that she's touting diet products when, the falsehood in the advertising is just, it drives me crazy, because, dieting, it shouldn't be such a bad word. And so we're going to talk a little bit about dieting, a little bit about food, and a little bit about what makes us tick in terms of how can we make our bodies run at optimal rates? How can we look our best? So first, I want to talk about diets. So I actually hate the word diet. I think the word diet is stupid. I think it makes me think of being starving and miserable all the time, and it makes me think of deprivation and then eventually binging and then feeling bad. And if I've been on several diets throughout my life, I'm willing to guess that some of you have been on some kind of diet, whether it's, I need to lose a couple pounds because I want to look great for my pictures, or I want to look good in my prom dress or my wedding dress, or I need to make weight for wrestling, or whatever it is. I hate that word. And so I want to change that perception of that word. I don't want it to be about what can I eat and what I can't eat. I want it to be about an eating lifestyle. And there are fad diets that happen, throughout the generations. And they're all completely flawed. So just to talk about a couple of them. So first we have low fat. So here was the problem with low fat. So when you talk about like low fat yogurt, you feel really good because you ate a low fat yogurt. Well, the issue with that is that they took the fat out and then they added a whole bunch of sugar in it to make it actually taste good. And that sugar, because it's empty calories, gets turned into fat. And fats are not the enemy, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, that there's actually really great fats out there for you. There have been studies done that people with traumatic brain injuries, and the research is very preliminary, but when they are given a very, very high dose of fish oil, which is omega-3 fats, when most of our brains are made out of omega-3 fats, it actually can help speed up the process of your brain healing itself, which is kind of amazing. And so also, I don't know if you guys are old enough to remember Olestra. So those were low fat. And you know what? On the side of Pringles with Olestra, it says may cause loose stools. And this didn't occur to anyone that there might be a problem with this. Olestra is actually illegal in Europe, just to show you how wonderful our food system is. So low carb, let's talk about Dr. Atkins. So what's the problem with low carbs? So one, not all carbs are the devil. There are carbs that are wonderful for you, like brown rice and sweet potatoes and just some really great natural sources of carbohydrates. And also, people took the low carb diet to mean, oh, well, I can eat eggs and bacon all day long, and that is bad fat. That is fat that is bad for your heart. That is fat that is something that in the long run will probably kill you. So then here's another fad. This was, maybe about 6 months ago. This book came out, Vegan Before 6. And I think people just really want, what's the answer to me so I can lose weight? What's the quick answer? And so Mark Bittman, who's actually a really respected journalist, came out with Vegan Before 6. And there's actually some elements that I think are fine, but here's the issue with being vegan. So I think that a vegan diet can be incredibly helpful if you make very conscious choices. But then there are people that I call muffin vegans who eat like white pasta with sauce and vegan muffins, and they don't get the nutrients that they need, and they actually don't look particularly healthy because it's really not that much better for you than eating, a croissant and cheese sandwich because you're not getting those nutrients that you need. And so I want the word diet to be completely eliminated from our vocabulary because it's not about a diet. It's about a lifestyle. It's about making good choices. And unfortunately, we live in a country where our food supply is full of really bad choices. And it's something where, you have to paddle upstream to do it, but the results and the effects of actually eating this way are so phenomenal that I really believe that if we as a country decide to, we're gonna not eat at McDonald's as much, we're not gonna drink as much soda, our health will see the benefits of that, tenfold in our health. Years and years ago, food was a very, very high percentage of people's income, incredibly high, like 30%. And healthcare was, down there at 10%. Now that's reversed, and it's not a coincidence. So let's talk about why we eat. So there are 3 basic reasons why people eat. One is for your health, this is going to energize me, this is going to make me look good, make me feel good. Another one is recreation, this is a cultural food experience, this is completely delicious. I'm in France, I'm gonna eat, the cheeses that they have here. And then there's emotional eating. And we have a really unhealthy relationship with food. Because if you think about what at least my parents used to tell me is finish your plate, otherwise you don't get dessert. So what that says actually is not only is food a reward, but we want you to overeat so you get that reward, which is also food. So those are sort of the 3 reasons why we make the food choices that we do. So this is what actually happens. So we have a lot of recreational eating. This is delicious, this is fun. We have a lot of emotional eating. I just broke up with my boyfriend, and so I'm gonna eat this entire gallon of ice cream. And then health, kinda, if it happens to be that you really like, spinach salad, it happens to be, within those 2 circles. So here's what my ideal is that, and this is what I ascribe to. So I eat really well, like 80% of the time. I allow myself to have, and I don't call them cheats, I call them treats, because I feel like you have to live your life and you have to be able to enjoy yourself. And, while I, most of the time, will choose a salad over a steak, once in a while, if I'm in a situation where I'm like, that looks incredibly delicious. And a lot of the food that I grew up with, my soul food, are like lox and bagels and a New York slice of pizza. And so when I go home, I live in Los Angeles now, but when I go home to New York, I'm going to enjoy that. And I'm also never someone that's going to go to someone's house and not eat what's being served to me, because I feel like that can be really isolating and that can create division, and that's not something that I'm interested in doing. And so most of the time, I eat really well, and then maybe like 2, 3, 4 meals a week, I eat whatever I want. And it's something where, while maintaining this, I now weigh significantly less than I did in college. I lost 15 pounds. And also, it's something where I'm not, gaining weight, and I don't feel bad about myself if I'm gonna, eat that bagel with lox. So let's talk about, when I say I eat healthy, people are like, well, what does that mean? So I had someone tell me once, yeah, I'm really healthy. Sometimes I'll skip lunch entirely and have a Diet Coke. Like, okay. So here's how I eat, and it's basically what Michael Pollan says, and Michael Pollan is a pretty well-known journalist who is really, has become very prominent in the area of food and the food industry of the United States. He says, eat not too much, mostly plants. That's pretty easy. That's not a diet, that's not, points, that's not, food that you're having portioned out. And so the beauty of this is that portion control is not really an issue if you're eating the right foods. And so what is good? So the good is that outer rim of the supermarket. The good is beans, nuts, seeds, veggies, fruits, anything that's as close to the source as possible. And so I eat tons and tons of brightly colored plants. And so, to me, no one ever got fat off of eating too much broccoli. It just doesn't happen. I think you'll probably vomit before that happens. Omega-3s, so these are the good fats I was telling you about. So that's available in nuts, in avocados, in small fish. And so that's stuff that actually increases your brain function. And it's really, and what's interesting is that I now take an omega-3 supplement. I used to suffer from really dry eyes and brittle nails. Once I started taking the supplement, totally gone. Lean proteins, and so, vegan, vegetarian, it doesn't really matter as long as you're eating the lean type of protein. And so if you are a meat eater, this means like lean chicken. Pescatarian, it means, salmon. And if you're, really, more on the plant-based end of things, it means beans and nuts and seeds and the like. And spices and herbs. There's so many medicinal properties in a lot of the spices that we eat, like cinnamon and like turmeric. And so the more that you have, and I don't say well, I'm going to add turmeric to my dish today because I think it's cancer, it helps me avoid cancer. For me, it's more about let's add flavor to my food. And one of the great side effects is that there's so many great antioxidants and great properties of all the various spices. So what's bad? So I love this picture right here because this pretty much has all of the bad things in one. So white processed food. So this is white rice, white flour, white sugar. All this stuff is stuff I pretty much don't eat anymore. And so if I'm going to have any sort of carbs, it's going to be brown rice. It's going to be sweet potatoes. It's going to be something that has a very, very high, it's a very nutrient-dense food. And so what happens with all this white processed food is, so 50, 60 years ago, they wanted to increase the shelf life of various products. So they took whole wheat flour. They stripped out the wheat part. They processed it down. And then you have white flour, which is essentially like eating cement. There's absolutely no nutritional value in white flour, and the same thing as the sugar in that low-fat yogurt. Your body treats it as sugar. You get that, crazy sugar high, and then it turns into fat into your body. And there's just no nutrients. It's like eating cotton candy, pretty much. Added chemicals. Anytime you see a food label and there's something you can't pronounce, or there's something that looks, like something you don't recognize, Michael Pollan says, if your grandmother doesn't recognize it as a food, don't eat it. And there's been studies that have shown that having all these chemicals in our bodies, it leaves them in a non-optimal state to fight off illness. And so if you're really eating for your health and eating for prevention, it's something that you really want to avoid. Bad fats, and so we're talking about that, that's in fried food, any sort of vegetable oil, that kind of thing. And then I'm not going to go into this in as much detail, but there's a lot of talk, and it's very trendy now to be gluten-free, and there's a lot of talk about food allergies. And what's really interesting is that there's new information coming out now where food allergies, you don't have to be fully allergic to something for it to have a bad effect on your body. And so the most common allergens are things like soy, corn, eggs, gluten, dairy, that kind of stuff. And so what I did, and what I, would say to anyone who, is interested in starting to eat a little bit healthier, is I decided to, cut out gluten and dairy, and then I ate a piece of I ate some grilled cheese and to see how I felt. I felt like crap after I ate it because my body was sensitive to these items. And, we live in a country where we think that we have to drink milk for calcium and we have to drink milk for all of these various things. And we don't. The biggest response that I have to people who are like, well, where do you get your calcium? Is there are countries where dairy is not consumed ever, and there's no glaring calcium deficiency in China. There's no glaring calcium deficiency in Japan. And really, we're the only nation that has calcium deficiency. And so while I don't think dairy is necessarily the devil, it's just not something that you necessarily need. And it's something that a lot of us are actually kind of allergic to. I saw estimates once that there are roughly 75% of us don't really have what it takes to digest dairy. So it's, an interesting side note of what we're told that we need to eat in order to be healthy versus what we actually need to be healthy. So a couple of common misconceptions. All calories are created equal, and I said this earlier today to the 9:30 a.m. biology class, but common knowledge used to be calories in, calories out. I'm going to eat this donut, and then I'm going to burn it off on the treadmill. And if you eat 100 calories of cotton candy and 100 calories of broccoli, it doesn't matter because it's a calorie is a calorie is a calorie. But that's not entirely true, because when you eat cotton candy, you're eating pure sugar. It gets absorbed into your bloodstream. You have this high that you get from the sugar, and then you sort of crash a little bit. I used to have a croissant every morning for breakfast, and then by 10:30 I was starving and I was like shaking and I didn't understand what was wrong. It was really my body coming down from all that sugar that I had just put into it. And so when you're eating the broccoli, you have fiber, you have vitamin C, and fiber is actually going to help absorb some of that sugar, and it's going to actually help slow down the absorption of that sugar into your bloodstream. And so it's something that's really incredible that you can eat as much broccoli as you want, and it's really going to have wonderful effects on your body versus if you're eating cotton candy, and not to mention it's like horrible for your teeth, you're going to have a lot of issues down the line. So what I was saying before also with dairy, that it's an essential part of our diet, it's not. The dairy lobby is pretty strong in the US, and so in order, that food pyramid that comes out every year, the fact that dairy is even on it, it's because a lot of people paid a lot of money to have that on it. And I am a cheese lover. I have a salt tooth, and so for me, it's not about chocolate, it's about cheese. And it's something that I'll occasionally indulge in, but since I have cut that out from my diet, I feel so much better than I used to. Because really, who feels really good after eating a lot of cheese? I don't know anyone that does. So, also, vegetarian and vegans don't get enough protein. This is a really common misconception, and I am not a vegan, I'm not a vegetarian. I tell people I eat a plant-based diet, because I do. A lot of the times what I'm eating could be considered vegan, but it's not something that I think about, in terms of, I won't eat honey because it came from bees. For me, I will only eat certain types of honey because certain types of honey have like wonderful nutrients and wonderful healing properties versus, that's the raw kind, versus the honey that you get at the supermarket that's been boiled and pasteurized and boiled. So all of those great healing properties are actually no longer in the product. And so it is completely possible to get a really balanced, well-rounded diet if you decide to avoid animal products. It's a non-issue, and I think we live in like beef country where if you don't eat beef, you're not getting enough protein, and it's just not true. So, I love that, Baconaise. Light. So, what should we be eating? Whole, real food without labels, preservatives, or chemicals. And so people ask me all the time, what do you eat? So I tell them, every morning I have a bowl of oatmeal, plain, with blueberries, cinnamon, and almonds. That's my breakfast. Lunch, maybe I'll have, and for a snack, maybe I'll have a brown rice cake with hummus. Lunch, I might have, one of my favorite, actually, people ask me, do you eat fast food? And I'm like, I don't really eat fast food, but like one of my favorite places to go is Chipotle. You can get a brown rice, black bean burrito bowl, and it's completely delicious and completely great for you, and it's so big, it could last you from lunch till dinner. And then what I was saying before is you don't want any sort of chemicals or preservatives or just stuff in there that you kind of wonder, like the pink slime. People remember when that came out? I'm going to bet that that's not the only thing that we don't know that we're eating. There's a lot of stuff that's actually legal in the US to put in food that's illegal in a lot of other countries. And it's the same with personal care products, which is kind of scary. So, a question I get a lot, should you eat organic? I can't really afford organic. What is organic? So, in order for something to be USDA organic certified, they have to go through a whole series of, evaluations and testing and all that stuff. But what organic means is without chemical pesticides. And there's some really amazing things that people are doing to naturally grow food. So for example, I was talking to an organic winemaker, which I found so fascinating. I was like, well, what's organic about wine? So when they grow the grapes, actually, instead of having pesticides everywhere, they have very strategically placed plants that will actually ward off natural predators of the grapes. And so they have stuff that either, the insects don't like, or they have stuff that, they prefer instead of the grapes. So it's really very, very fascinating what they can do. And so what I tell people is, if you can afford it, sometimes it does pay to get organic, because there are really high levels of pesticides in some foods that are not organic. So the EWG, which is the Environmental Working Group, they do a study every year where they test tons and tons of produce that comes from, that's basically from American supermarkets. And they come out every year with this list called the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15. And so what's so great about this, it basically, on the left, you have the Dirty Dozen. And so these are things that tested the highest level of pesticides even after you wash the produce. So for example, apples, I will buy organic. I won't do non-organic apples. But we have things like eggplant and avocados and onions and garlic. That stuff sweet potatoes is another one. That stuff rarely, if ever, gets sprayed, or if it does, it doesn't absorb it. And so it's something where you really, and they have, an online app if you want to look at the grocery, if you want to have it with you when you go through the grocery store. But there's some really, really great stuff that you can eat that it really doesn't matter whether it's organic or not. And so this is something that I refer people to because, sometimes you want, so like greens, I'll always buy organic. And so you can make those choices and you can make those decisions and sort of optimize your eating budget, which I think is really, really great. Okay, so when should you eat? I think you should eat when you're hungry and don't eat when you're not. It's very simple, but we also have like kind of an unhealthy relationship with food, which makes the when part of eating, especially for a college student. I felt like I was eating all the time in college and I was always hungry. But basically, I do 3 meals, 2 snacks. It doesn't always work, but especially when I'm traveling, it's kind of a little bit more difficult. I avoid eating late at night, just because it kind of just sits with you, and it's not so great to go to sleep on a full stomach. And eat when you're actually hungry, and make the choice to. A lot of times when I'm hungry, what's really interesting is that hunger can be a sign of dehydration. So first I'll drink a glass of water and be like, am I still hungry? If I am, I'll eat something, and if not, I realize that I was just dehydrated, which is really interesting. So why? So a lot of people ask me, well, you had this crazy health scare, and I totally understand why you went and started eating the way that you do. But I'm in college, or I'm just starting out. I feel fine eating pizza, and it's cheap, and it's good, and so how can I inspire myself to eat really well without having this, sort of life-changing scare? And my answer is, there are so many other benefits to eating this way other than health. If you want to go the vanity route, my jeans fit a lot better than they used to. Like the muffin top issue is not as bad as it used to be. And there's also, it clears up your skin, you sleep better. There's so many other aspects of your life that if you're just eating real food, and it's so fascinating that, we're dieting, and really you just need to eat like a salad with olive oil and lemon juice and a Chipotle burrito bowl without all of the, extra stuff. And you actually will look and feel so much better. And also, if you have any sort of illness in your family, there is this new area of medicine called functional medicine, because in America, we're so used to treating everything with drugs. Restless leg syndrome. And we're actually one of the few countries where it's legal to advertise drugs to consumers. In most countries, it is not legal to do that. And so we think, okay, I have this problem, I have this inflammation, I have, this rash, I have whatever it is. Let's treat it with steroids, let's treat it with drugs, and there's, billions and billions of dollars that are going into creating, new drugs. I have type 2 diabetes, and I need all of these various drugs, which actually drove me crazy when Paula Deen had this opportunity when she got type 2 diabetes to say, you know what, my lifestyle contributed to this. And she had this opportunity to go out and say, here's a new way of eating, because all of the research is saying that type 2 diabetes is 100% preventable, and it is also, up to a certain point, completely reversible. And there's really fascinating research that's calling Alzheimer's, which is something that runs in my family, type 3 diabetes, that you're eating so much and so much processed food that your brain function actually shuts down. And there's different testing going on now where they see that Alzheimer's is actually being somewhat reversed just by feeding the test subjects blueberries, which is kind of incredible. And so it's something where I would say to people, try it for a day. Walk out of here and say, you know what, I'm not going to drink, and it can be small steps. I'm not going to drink soda for the next week and see how I feel. I am going to cut out, white flour and see how I feel. It's actually amazing when I cut out sugar and white flour, and it's really fascinating how sugar and flour are, like the way that sugar is made from sugar cane, it's a very similar process to how cocaine is made. So when you have the leaves of the coca plant, which are actually put in the lab and they create cocaine out of it, the leaves are perfectly safe to consume, and a lot of South American countries have been consuming them in tea form for years. But when you concentrate it and concentrate it and concentrate it, you get this very fine substance that has a very, very strong effect on your body and on your cognition and on, it gives you a high. And the way that sugar is created as well, and high fructose corn syrup, it's all the same. They take something and then they concentrate it and concentrate it and concentrate it until you get to a point where it actually does give you a high. And so when I cut out sugar and all of that stuff, I actually went into pretty serious withdrawal. I was very lightheaded, my hands were shaking, and so the first couple of days were kind of difficult. But I would just say, try it. Try it for 3 days. Say that maybe every Monday I'm going to eat this way and see how you feel. And I think people will be really surprised at the results. So common roadblocks to eating well: time, money, and taste. So I don't have time. And that is a pretty big, it's a problem because we lead such busy lives. But what I tell people is, people say, I don't have time to eat well, I don't have time to prepare food, because you do need to cook a little bit more and you do need to plan a little bit more when you are living this sort of lifestyle, this preventative, healthy lifestyle. I say, I don't really have time for TV. I don't really have time for a lot of, spending hours trolling Twitter. Like, I just don't have time for that stuff because it's important enough to me to make it a priority. And so you can always find a little bit of time, no matter what you're doing. If you have kids, you can get your kids involved. If, you live in a living group or fraternity or sorority, make it a point to have dinner once a week where everyone cooks, or to, decide as a group that you're going to go and eat healthy, or that you're going to go to a dance class, or whatever it is. Money. So it doesn't have to be, but it is more expensive to eat healthy, and it's a product of our food system and how heavily subsidized the cheap food is versus the food that's actually good for us. And so there are ways around it. There's a lot of movement toward community-supported agriculture. I belong to one in LA, I belong to one when I lived in New York, and it's basically where you buy a share of a farm and then you have a whole box of fruits and vegetables that show up at your door once a week. So that's something. Or you can find really cheap sources of protein. You can find, beans or oatmeal or whatever it is. There are ways to get around, the 99-cent menu at McDonald's. And then the last one is taste. And this is unfortunately something that we have brought upon ourselves. So we have genetically engineered foods, basically. We have created foods that are not really foods. They are food-like products. They are products that are made to taste amazing. They are made to make us salivate. They're made for us to crave them. And it's something where that as you start eating well and as you start eating a little bit better, you'll find that your taste buds change. And so for me, what seemed so delicious before is actually not to me anymore. And so because I don't eat a lot of sugar now, fruit to me is super sweet. I eat a lot of stuff that has natural sugars in it, and that's something that, if I am craving something sweet, that's something that's, a really, really great way to go about doing it. So I'm at college, what do I do? So when I was in college, I would have been sitting in this talk and be like, yeah, I don't have time, I don't have money, and there's free pizza all the time, what do I do? And so what I would say for, the folks of you that are, the number of you that are still in school, is that there are ways to make small changes, whether it's, I'm not gonna drink soda. I feel like that's a really easy one to do. Water's free. Whether it's, instead of that breakfast sandwich, I'm gonna eat a bowl of oatmeal. Whether it's, instead of I'm gonna get the salad for lunch today instead of the other stuff. So there are ways to go about doing it. So with a little bit of planning, you can say, okay, I have class in this place, And then I have, here's my schedule, and here's what I can eat throughout the day that will be healthy and will give me the most energy. And I always have snacks on me, so I'll have baby carrots or some kind of nut or seed or whatever it is. Have a healthy breakfast at home. My favorite thing to eat at home when I really don't have time, I throw a bunch of frozen blueberries, some spinach, you don't taste it, I swear, and some almond milk and some hemp protein powder in a blender with some ice. Delicious, and it just tastes like blueberries. Oh, and a banana. Tastes like blueberries and banana. And then do it with someone. It's really difficult when you're sort of by yourself, trying to figure out and navigate through this. But if you have a friend that said, okay, let's do meatless Mondays, or let's do something really healthy every Friday, it's so much easier when you have that support group. So I want to take a couple minutes to touch on exercise. I really do think that food is 80% of the battle in terms of being healthy, and you can reach your goals if you can't exercise for whatever reason. So 30 minutes, 2 to 3 times a week, that's sort of that minimum optimal way. And for me, I have found what works for me. I need to pay for a class where the instructor is very attractive, and and if I end up not going, I lose money. So for me, that works. And maybe what works for you is you really love the outdoors and you love going hiking, or maybe you go volunteer at the local animal shelter and walk dogs. So whatever makes it for you that it doesn't feel like exercise, or going with a friend to a dance class, just find what works for you, because you'll be so much happier for having done it. And it's really nice to not get so winded when you're going up a flight of stairs. So that's it for me. And now if you guys have any questions, feel free.